what does liberation look and feel like? Let me begin from there. Let me begin that brainstorm from that place. I could not begin the birth center from a place of Black death.
Welcome to the Evolutionary Leadership Podcast. My name is Gibrán Rivera, and I'm a facilitator. With this podcast, I'm inviting you into a conversation with remarkable people who are devoting their lives to the evolution of consciousness and culture. With this episode, I get to talk to Nashira Baril. Nashira Baril is a friend of mine. I've been in community with her about 15 years. And in this podcast, we talk about her work towards designing a birth center. Nashira is devoting her life's energy to helping women reclaim this most sacred aspect of womanhood, the act of giving birth. Nashira is a public health professional. She's been in the field for 17 years, most of it focused on bringing racial justice to public health. And these days, she is designing and coordinating a fellowship program, a capacity and leadership building program for public health professionals who are concerned with equity. It's called Health Equity Awakened. And just a couple of weeks back, I was able to offer 1 day of training to her fellows. It was quite a beautiful time. I was really honored that Nashira brought me in. She's also part of the Evolutionary Leadership Cohort of 2015, the first Evolutionary Leadership Cohort, and has been a very beautiful and integral part of our community and of that very, very special experiment. For me, this conversation is magical, and I hope you will find that yourself, because there's a moment of realization here in which Nashira helps us to see the connection between birth, womanhood, body, and liberation. What does it mean for all of us to put our energy behind women reclaiming this deep knowledge, this evolutionary wisdom, ancestral wisdom that their bodies hold? What are the implications of that for our collective liberation? I was inspired, and I hope that you are too. As I always say, remember, these are just the first days of our podcast, and we are hungry for your feedback. Send us a note. Let us know what you think. Let us know how to make it better. But now, definitely enjoy this conversation with Nashira. Thank you for listening. Hola, Nashira.
Good morning.
I am so happy that you're here.
I'm thrilled. Thanks for having me.
This is exciting. I'm appreciating all the energy that you've already brought into this space.
Thank you.
We are here to talk about so many things, but the main topic of our conversation is the neighborhood birth center. This idea, this dream, this calling that you've been holding for a long, long time. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, I love the energy with which you say it. It makes me really excited. The Neighborhood Birth Center will be, right now is a vision, it will be the first freestanding independent birth center in Boston, a space for pregnant folks to receive care, pregnancy care, labor and birth support, supported by midwives. Imagine just having your pregnancy care in a spa-like setting, as opposed to a hospital setting. And when it comes time to labor and birth, to be supported by midwives and doulas in that same setting, with access to a tub and space and support to labor the way that your body is calling, and then to be able to cuddle with that babe and family, whoever you decide to have with you in that space. It's very different. It's very different than I think what we've come to understand as spaces where we labor and birth and get our pregnancy care. So I'm thrilled by the idea.
Wow, Nashira, you transmitted so much in sharing it just now. It like
Thanks.
pierced me. There's something about it that feels so liberating. It feels like a liberatory project. Tell me more about where
That's
it
it.
comes from. Like, how was this born inside you?
Yeah, well, I love that. It feels liberatory to work on it, and I think it's also about birth liberation, right? I start by saying like the idea of having a birth center in Boston, predates me coming on the scene. This is an idea that some elders, had and tried back in the late 80s and early 90s. And I came to know about their work in the last 10 years or so. And it stopped me in my tracks. I was like, what do you mean you all wanted, we're working on a birth center in Roxbury? And I invited them into conversation, and I said, what would it mean for you if we started that up again? And do I have your blessing to try again? It wasn't the time then. I think politically, socially, there wasn't as much data around safety. Insurance companies weren't going to reimburse it. Hospitals weren't going to support it. So I kind of said to them, like, what do you think about now? And that was almost 4 years ago. And they said, yes, now. And I said, do you trust me to try it? And they are my advisors now on the advisory committee.
Oh my God, this sounds so beautiful.
Thank you.
What a privilege I imagine it must be to work with elders.
Yeah. It is. It is an incredible privilege, and it for me it connects to my ancestors who were midwives, and a real deep appreciation of the folks who have been working around both midwifery and improving birth outcomes, but also just in community in Boston for a really long time. Like, it would feel inauthentic to be doing this without their guidance and their, it's like, it's their wisdom that allows me to kind of do the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can feel that I only have growing appreciation for my elders. And part of, I approach this topic, the topic of a birth center, the topic of laboring, right, with care and the utmost humility, right? It's just like, how do I even talk about this? I do want to share that the birth of my son, and again, what am I, right? But a spectator, right? In this glorious process.
We can come back to that.
I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
that. I could probably use your help, as you can tell. He came in 2 months early, so there was a lot of people in the room. But that moment, it's the single most important moment in my life. I mean, I can only think of one other moment in which I just experienced this initiation that has shaped the rest of my life, and I think even made me capable of experiencing my son's birth. But the doctor, the OBGYN who does this all day every day, actually took out his iPhone and started recording me because my reaction was so wild.
Really?
Right.
What was your
It
reaction?
was some form of divine ecstasy and joy and tears. And my mother said I was just praising God. She said I was just praising God.
I'd love to see that video.
It was wild. It was wild. But the reason why I bring that up is to say that my own quote unquote marginal experience to this sacred, this most sacred of life moments, is the most important in my life. I can only imagine, right? Like what you are reclaiming, right? What you're reclaiming for the people at the center of this cosmic dance, right? For the Holy Feminine feels really powerful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for saying reclaiming. That's a word that's really been reverberating for me around this for a long time. This idea of like reclaiming both the power of pregnancy and labor and birth, and I don't think we are supported in feeling that power and having that reflected back to us, right, in our society at this moment in time. And so like reclaiming that feels like it's due, right? It's the work that we have to do to get free, and it connects us to our ancestors. And it also is just like healing, right? If you're allowed to feel that level of power, you know, who could we be? What a powerful way to step into what is that next phase of like parenthood, and right, what it means to have it come from that place.
Yeah.
And for so many, it comes from like quite the opposite. It is such a place of trauma and like heartache and physical pain. Undue, I would say, right? There's like physical pain, but like undue trauma and pain. So it's like it's about listening to not only our bodies, but also like the wisdom of our ancestors. Like our bodies were designed for this. And I don't know, we've created all of these ways to like just not listen to that and not allow it to be so. So I just think there's something really powerful about you creating a space to get back to that.
Wow. We've been in this conversation for a while. I've been blessed to bear witness to your journey. And I say with sincerity that there's a way in which it's resonating with me at a cellular level right now. It that makes it feel of central importance, right, to this evolutionary project, right? It makes it feel like a golden key. I don't want to say like the golden key, but a golden key. Right?
Yeah. I want to go back for 1 second, because you said you've been bearing witness to this, or I would argue, well, from my perspective, you have been one of the midwives of this for me. So I just want to give that back to you.
Oh, that's
absolutely
beautiful.
One of the midwives of this process and of my evolution. So
thank you.
You are integral to this too. Thank you. Yeah. It feels really special to be doing this with you, talking about it in this way. Yeah, thanks.
It's so powerful. It's so, so beautiful. How? Why? Like, why this? What was in place before? Like, tell me a little something about your story. Where do you come from? Like, how does Nashira end up being the creative life force behind the neighborhood birth center? Where do you come from?
Well, when I start by saying that I am the daughter of Claudette and the granddaughter of Simone and the great-granddaughter of Octavia. Two of those women are midwives. Octavia, my great-grandmother, and my mother, Claudette. And I am the mother of Nicolaya and Noelle, who were both born at home. So it's incredibly personal for me in that way. So that, you know, my origin to understanding birth comes from always having it been talked about as incredibly normal and natural experience. When I was 7 years old, my sister was born at home. What an experience for a 7-year-old, right?
Wow.
And by the time my brother was born 2 years later, I was 9. And my mother was a doula at the time, so I was really surrounded by a lot of pregnancy and birth. And by the time he was born, I was reading Nancy Drew Mysteries in the next room, and they said, "Come in, your mother's in labor." And I said, "Tell me when she's crowning. Tell me when the baby's here, and I'll come in due time." So it was very normal for me at a young age. So fast forward, I'm not yet thinking about having kids of my own, right? But I'm coming out of college and I'm really looking for work in women's health. And I ended up landing this job that became kind of the beginning of my career working on racial health inequity, right? And at that time, my first job was looking at health outcomes, and particularly birth outcomes for Black women and infants in Boston. So I feel like I swung in the opposite direction. I swung in this other place of really being steeped in really hard and painful data around bad outcomes, right? All of the bad outcomes. And I really, my career was really informed by that. And I spent a lot of time talking about bad outcomes and researching bad outcomes and thinking about community interventions for bad outcomes. And then somewhere there was like this weaving of, I studied maternal and child health in grad school at BU, which is where I came to connect with Joanna Rory, who is one of the elders I mentioned earlier, who, long held this vision for Boston, and some others I came to know in my public health career, and began to reconcile a little bit as I started to think about my own pending motherhood, right? I was clear I would have home birth. Took a little cajoling, bringing a process of bringing my partner along on that to understand, right? Because for so many, it's like, well, why wouldn't we? I mean, we'd go to the hospital. It's automatic.
Right.
So there was a little process there of having to kind of come to understanding about what that meant for us. And then, I don't know, then I had my daughter born at home, a really powerful experience, and I was still really focused on racial health inequity in public health. Until we had this conversation about what would it mean to breathe life back into this idea of a birth center. And so I guess it brought me back to feeling like this is one of the ways forward, right? This is probably the most concrete way in my career in public health that I think of making change in those bad outcomes. And in the immediate, and also generationally, I think it could have an impact.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Where are you in the process of creating this birth center?
Well, I feel like I'm deep in it, right? 4 years now of working on it. And also very startup, right? So I'll give you a couple specifics. You want some details?
Please.
Yeah.
This is exciting.
Yeah. So we are closing in on submitting for nonprofit status, which feels like a important milestone. It took a little while to arrive whether that was the right decision.
Yeah.
The majority of birth centers in this country are not nonprofits. They're just owned and operated by midwives who decide to open a birth center. This is a different model. It's taken a little bit of figuring out how to do a nonprofit birth center. We've changed the name in the last year to a neighborhood birth center, and working on some branding, logo design, website, all of the things that I think, and real text for how we talk about the birth center, including this conversation with you, feels like all of these bricks towards that foundation of, I've been using the word legitimacy. That doesn't feel necessarily right. I'm open to another word for that. But just those things where funders and partners can look at you and say, oh, you've done these things that are really moving towards an actual space and place and vision. How do you put those foundation pieces together? in the last couple of years, we did a survey, 550 respondents. So we have a lot of data
Wow.
that we're analyzing. We did a bunch of interviews as well as focus groups. So that was an important piece because one of my advisors said to me, if you build it, will they come?
Right.
And I said, well, yeah. And then because he's a renowned researcher in maternal and child health and birth centers, I said, well, all right, yeah, now I guess I got to go get the data to support that. So we did. We got the data that says if we build it, will you come? And the answer was yes.
That is so amazing.
The answer was yes. Yeah, so it was really powerful. So we've taken some of those steps in the last couple of years, and in a really, we're in this incredible conversation with some folks around space. Like, how do we? Folks will say, like, well, where will the birth center be? And I said, well, I don't know. I know what's important in terms of like structurally, what the building and space needs. I know what is important around location. Access to transportation, but also proximity to hospital, like all of that. But I also know that it needs to be, this is actually an evolution of my thinking, that it actually needs to be really centered in community, meaning like with others in a mutually identified, like kind of collective space. I actually, because I birthed my children at home and come from like that home birth experience, I thought we'd have a birth center kind of in a home on a hill,
Right.
maybe right around here. But I came to understand, and I'm testing this. This is an idea that I'm
Yes.
holding. I am open to the idea of evolving over time. But now I kind of believe more that we have to be in a more central location, in a space that has some foot traffic and some other things that draw people in and say, wait a minute, if I go up to that floor, I could have my baby here and look at this space here, right? Because it does feel like a stretch for folks to imagine getting their care and having their baby outside of a hospital. Because we've been so trained that this is like the most vulnerable you are in your life and you need all of these supports. And so many folks are not, in my conversations, I've heard there's just like an uncertainty about being isolated, like in a home setting, in a house, I should say, like in a neighborhood, right? So I'm toying with the idea now of a more communal space, a building that's shared with others.
That's so beautiful. I like the way that sounds, and well, it just reminds me of a larger group conversation we had a few weeks back, right, with a couple of Boston actors, just trying to imagine what it would be to have this kind of service is a terrible word. Multi-purpose.
It's like multimodal liberation.
Multimodal liberation. Ashe. I'm so into it. I love this.
Does that work?
I
Something
like
that?
it. I like it. I like it. It's I keep going back. So here's a question I had or a thought. Is it a question or a thought? It's a mixture of both. So I'm thinking about the points of engagement, right? So it seems like what you're talking about, I understand how there's this deep conditioning, right? That centers the hospital and the medical industrial complex. I get that. I'm in that. I've only relatively recently, if at all, understood that I can push back on the doctor. You know what I mean? It's just not part of my class and cultural upbringing. The doctor knows. You're just gonna get that from your grandparents, and if nobody disrupts it, nobody disrupts it. At the same time, what you're talking about seems like the most primal of primals, right? And the way you talk about it, therefore, that kind of knowledge, that kind of cellular wisdom, it's almost impossible to fundamentally override. The conditioning can set deep grooves on top of it, but it's so well laid. It's so strong that I wonder, are there earlier points of engagement in the pregnancy in which you're not talking necessarily immediately about a birth at the center, but you're talking about, the point is to help women connect to that kind of spiritual, primal, liberated part, right? Which is must be so accessible, right? It's just like it's and I wonder what you've thought of as the point of engagement on this.
It's such a good question. And it's so I'm thinking about I have two thoughts, right? Absolutely. I think the point of engagement is before pregnancy, right? And I want to offer like a couple of thoughts about that. One is like, we want the birth center to be known in the community, a place where folks have come because of accessing other things in the building and taking a tour, but also a space for childbirth education and, other, I could think of other healing modalities, right? For new parents. And I've even had this vision of like some group healing, some therapy, some art healing around trauma for our grandparents and for our elders, right? Who are carrying their own birth experiences, many of which, in my experience in the last couple of years of talking to people about the birth center, are unaddressed or have just not been cracked open. Like, you come home, you have a baby, focus on becoming a new parent, and the world spins on, and there's so much stuff there that hasn't been touched on for generations.
Wow.
So what if the birth center were a space where that practice was happening, so that people were engaging with it before the first time you pee on a stick and have that positive pregnancy test, right? So that's one thought. Is I think there's multiple ways of engaging with the space and the intention of it as a healing place that is kind of broader than that pregnancy period. And the other, which connects a little bit to kind of our business model, which is, I hope that the birth center is a space, my vision is that it's a space where you can come and engage in any of the offerings, right? It could be from classes to, chiropractic to massage to prenatal yoga, right? All of that. Even if you decide ultimately to have your baby in a hospital or to have your baby at home.
Nice.
Right? So that is a hope that it becomes like a hub of resources and supports choice, because that's really what this is about. I'll be honest, offering all of those things and then not having the business model, like the payout of having the birth at the birth center, is a challenge to how we figure out how to fund and sustain this, right?
Got it.
So we can offer you like all the goodies, but then like the big global payment goes somewhere else.
Got it.
So that's a hard piece, but I haven't given up on that yet. We're still trying to figure out. And there's absolutely a way to do it, right? There's absolutely a way to have people engage with all of the. So to your point, I think you can connect and connect into the idea of physiologic birth. And the power of that at any point as an elder who's coming in and then has some healing and connection, and all of a sudden something is dislodged or reintegrated that allows that person to imagine suggesting to their daughter, their granddaughter, their neighbor that they might check out the birth center.
Right.
That happens for the elder.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways I think of engaging folks.
This is so inspiring to me. It just feels it just feels like the right point of intervention. It really, really does. It reconnects us to who we are. I think that on the balance, human beings get caught in our exceptionalism vis-a-vis nature, right? Kind of being the top of the heap at all except for the weather, which is so much bigger than us. But I digress. Let me take a step back from there. But there is this thing that's one of the things that's unique about us, and you know this better than I do. Is it's our birthing, and as even as mammalians, and the long infancy of our young. And this has many things. One of which is it's part of what binds us into community with each other. The fact that for the first stage years of our life, we're completely vulnerable. We are fully in the hands of others, compared to a little horse that should be able to get up within the hour of birth, right? So there's this something so central to our evolution, to be met in this way, and to have people kind of reclaim that in their own bodies. It seems explosive in terms of its implications. It seems truly revolutionary. And I wonder, I wonder how much part of that story this is, because maybe I don't know. Who are you seeking funds from? Like health folk or revolutionary folk? Who's supporting you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love the invitation to think about that context, right? And how that then shapes who the partners are in this. To date, we haven't limited ourselves to health funds, health foundations, but I haven't deeply explored the possibility of the revolution funding it.
Right? I mean, there's something there. At least some visionaries must understand the implications of this.
Yeah, I mean, I have thought for a while that there's someone out there, right? I don't know who they are, or some configuration of people that deeply believes in this. Yeah.
I'll repeat, and I've thought it a good idea since you named it, and I've always kind of been really proud of being affiliated with it in any way, right? Like it's something that means has always meant a lot to me, and there's definitely a different quality of transmission, right, that I'm getting, and maybe it's because we haven't sat down and talked about it for a while, so that might be part of it too. But there's something that's really alive here.
I've also worked harder on it in the last year than I have before. It feels like, and I don't know quite how, because I also had a baby in the last year and haven't slept. So it's something about burning the midnight oil. I've just been cranking on it for really kind of reached a different level of commitment from others too in the last year, right? There are others who are really churning on it as well. So building my tribe, as you told me to a couple of years ago.
That's so beautiful. I just want to name, kind of honor, pause, and thank you for being here through sleep deprivation. And thank you for a whole year of this kind of sacred toll, right? As you bring this gorgeous soul into the world who's so amazing.
Thank you.
What a gift. But I'm sorry it's been hard.
It's rugged to not sleep at all. Yeah, it's rugged. But you just somehow when you're in it, you're just managing, right? We have a lot of resources. I feel really privileged in a lot of ways, and we're just keep on keeping on and know that it will pass.
Many blessings, many blessings.
Thank you.
And thank you. I think it's just so important to lift that up, and it just doesn't the impossible initiation that mothers are put through in our culture for years, without anywhere near the amount of community support that this endeavor merits. Thank you.
Which is exactly, I mean, you said it right there, like initiation and community support, right? But that's like part of what we want to bring back into the experience of launching, parenthood with that really central. Yeah. And I'm thinking of something else too, that just wanting to name that there are, 300 or more like birth centers around the country, that this is happening in other places.
Yeah.
And those are the birth centers that are like, accredited and, part of this network, but also that like midwives birth this entire country, right? So there's like this whole history that what I just I'm kind of having a moment of like, this is not new, right?
Yeah.
There are tools out there. There's like both the history, but then there's also like right now organizations designed to help open a birth center, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's like some real things that are helping to move this process along. The big question is, like what's going on in Massachusetts?
Right.
Where are we? Why do we have so few dots on the map? And how do we, and why not in Boston to date, right? So I think
in Boston of all places. Well, you can understand why being the center, but it should be here too.
Right. Well, I think that's important to name, right? Boston is like this, healthcare,
Right.
Landscape, has such a rich healthcare landscape, and there are 26 or so community health centers right around us. And so my real question is, how does a birth center be integrated in a really thoughtful way into the healthcare landscape, so that we're adding an offering and an option, and not, this is not like an anti-hospital initiative, right? This is like just to add to the table, and I think there's really something in it for hospitals too.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
No, this is
for
brilliant.
centers,
I like, and I think it's important to make that specific argument.
Yeah.
The specific argument. I want to ask you a question so that it can simmer a bit, and then offer a reflection that I think you'll resonate with. So I want to ask a little bit about your inner game, right? What has had to happen inside you, right, for this to get to where it is right now, and for you to embody it in the way you're embodying it right now. So a little bit of that, because I think it's really helpful to people listening who are individuals with a dream. Hopefully always in the context of community, but individuals with a dream, to know what happens inside somebody as they churn something into being. So I have that inquiry. But the reflection is one that I know you and I have played with a bit. This idea of our being ancestors in training, as well as being our ancestors' wildest dreams, right? So this idea kind of places us in this line, in this spectrum of being. And I really like the way we speak and bring in the ancestors more comfortably into more of the spaces that I find myself in. Because all people, everybody's original religion was honoring the ancestors, right? So another primal practice, if you will. But I also think that by anchoring in that lineage, we automatically think more of our descendants, right? And I feel that there's this thing here in which we are among the first generation of human beings to steal from the future, right? Like, human beings have always worked to leave for their descendants, right? And we're stealing from them.
So painful.
So I feel like an ancestral perspective can help us give us a descendant perspective. And I similarly feel like attention to how we come into the stream, right? This approaching this birthing as a reclamation of the wisdom that is most inherently ours is one of the things that helps to give us perspective, that helps to place us in an arc, and maybe is more likely to awaken our responsibility for our descendants, it's by connecting to birth, by connecting to death, with those, by thinking about descendants, by thinking about ancestors. I just find what you're talking about to be really, really pivotal, really at the heart of this liberatory project. And I say that when I mean that when I say it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm a little curious about this inner game.
Game. So your question is what I've gone through, kind of how I've gotten here. What's my practice?
Yeah, okay, so there's a bunch of assumptions. One of them is it hasn't all been smooth sailing.
That's a fair one.
And a lot of the stumbles had an outward manifestation. And that somehow all of them were connected to something happening inside. So I'm sure there's many things happening, but if you had to pick one of those story threads today, what's happened? What has been the churning? What has been the realization?
Yeah. I think the biggest one is and brings me back to an experience that I had with you in Evolutionary Leadership Workshop was, getting comfortable with experimenting, right? So I remember when I first transitioned from my job at the health department, where I'd been for over a decade, and I had a little bit of spaciousness, a month or two of being unemployed. I remember sitting at a cafe trying to brain dump about the birth center, right? And I was beginning from the place, where I had been trained, right? So I would sit there at Haley House Cafe in Roxbury, typing, Black women are 4 times more likely to die, delete. Black infants are more likely to have preterm, delete, like that. But I was beginning from that place. So one was just my own process of, for a while I called it unlearning, but it was just kind of healing from being so steeped in that data and in that practice of sitting in the inequity and leading with that, and trying to then create interventions, program, policy from, that place. I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, but what was missing for me was the liberation piece, right? So what does liberation look and feel like? Let me begin typing from there. Let me begin that brainstorm from that place. And that was what really happened for me when you and I were out on that island in British Columbia. And I was coming to this awakening of that. I could not begin the birth center from a place of Black death. Right? Period.
Wow.
That data is there, has not gone away, has not changed. And yes, we can lean on that in proposals should we need to, put that on the table for funders. But it just couldn't be where this was birthed from, right? So there's one, was my own process that year of really pivoting my own practice of, how I orient myself to public health.
Wow.
And to wellness. So that was one.
Wow.
Yeah.
I find that really striking. I really, really do. I don't want you to lose your thread, but what keeps coming to mind is somebody that was reading college admission essays, and they were saying, why does every person of color need to come in through their suffering. Like they felt like they were reading oppression porn as college essays, you know. And I'm just noticing that this pattern reveals itself
Right.
in like from every angle you look at it.
Right. And so in both, I think in people's like experience that they're writing and in the truth of the data, like it's the real stuff, but it's the institutions that are like, you know, putting a bounty on that and prioritizing like to lead with that wound, right? So I think those are really important stories, and the data is like there's truth there and there's like people's lives there. So I'm not saying like let's not use that, but it's just as a place of wound, right? And yeah. But it was also like very much my training, right? My orientation to health was through that place. So there's that. And then I think the other is just the experimentation, right? Because I think another piece of my training that isn't even necessarily around my professional career to date, but just like how I've been trained up in the world, right? All of the ways that I've been socialized are like, you know, and certainly it was rewarded professionally to like hole up, right? Head down in an office, right? With some advisors maybe and write the thing, be it the plan, be it the proposal, be it right, and then like release it out into the world. And I tried that for a little bit around the birth center, right? So still at that same cafe, there I am at my corner table. Now I'm no longer kind of writing from a place of just centering the poor, you know, inequity, that poor outcome data. But I'm still trying to write the whole thing, right? With the touch points with advisors, but really kind of, and I had to have that awakening of like, this has got to be a process of experimentation, and like being okay with that is really hard because it feels vulnerable and it feels like I should have it all figured out. And so I think one real clear lesson for me, or one kind of example of that is this feeling for the first, you know, beginning of this process, first year or two of like feeling like I needed to have all the FAQs kind of answered, right? How's this going to be funded? How do we reconcile, you know, the number of births with the reimbursement, and, you know, what's the staffing model like, and who's our hospital partner? And, you know, having studied the state regulations on out-of-hospital birth centers, like all this stuff that I had to have it all together. And increasingly these days, I'm like, well, one, I have built myself a pretty mean team of advisors. So one is just, I don't have all the answers, and being okay with that. Feeling like I've built a team that they probably do have the majority of the answers, right? And also that like, I don't know yet who our hospital partner is going to be. But I'm working really hard to like, you know, create a vision that I feel like hospitals can understand and get behind. And in my wildest dreams, some of the area hospitals might be jockeying to be our partner.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So I think my process has been a little bit of just being okay with the vulnerability of not having the answers. Because if you had asked me to be on record on the mic 2 or 3 years ago, what do you think about a hospital part? I would, well, this is how we're approaching it, and a very like feeling like I needed to know. I don't know yet, but I am experimenting. I'm having a lot of coffee dates and a lot of conversations with folks, and just, you know, sharing the truth of like the vision and the data that we have to back that people, if we build it, they'll come, and really asking for help where we need it, right? I need the help of hospital partners. I need our community health centers' help. And so feeling like I could emerge from that place of having it all figured out, and having my FAQs right up on the website or in my folder to slide to you at the table. I don't know, right? But I've got some really dope people trying to help me figure it out, and that feels good. That also feels liberatory, right? Yeah. Like the process is also, it's not just that the birth center itself is like a liberatory space, but just how we get there also has to feel different.
For sure.
Because it
can't,
I think that's also why it was, you know, why it's been a slow and intentional place to even get where we are right now, is just not kind of like running to create an organization, a nonprofit, in the ways that many are like, built. You know what you need to do in terms of the nonprofit application, the board, the this, that, the funding. We've been like really trying to think about what would it mean and look like to stretch and do it differently, even if ultimately we still apply for a C3, right? Even if ultimately we still get funding from this foundation, but we've really explored, I don't know, liberation and community, and then we can do it differently.
Yeah.
Right?
No, whatever you're doing, whatever you're doing, like everything you've just articulated, it's working.
Thank you.
Your entire vibrational field around this thing that's being born through you, that's chosen you as its vehicle. It's you are making room for it, and I can feel it, and I just really want to honor the path that you've taken, and I'm really glad that you took the time to break it down so that people can start to discern like what is the equivalent of that happening inside of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Who told us we had to go it alone, right?
Yeah.
It's so counter to like our primal feeling, right? Both in terms of like entrepreneurial endeavors, startup projects, visions, and birth,
Yeah.
and death,
And death.
right? Who said we had to go it alone? And interrogating that, and then connecting back to like definitely what wasn't our ancestors that told us that, right?
That really feels like a practice worth engaging, like a practice worth engaging. Yes, that committed act of reclamation of the most sacred moments in our humanity. I'm so grateful.
Yeah. And in that, we may name some oppression, right? I think that's where some of that
Yes.
college essay, like that stuff is real. Let's name where those lessons came from and where that experience has shaped, and then let's also figure out how to birth.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
really
I
good.
can definitely name where those lessons came from for me. That I had to have it all figured out. Right? But it's not working.
Yeah. No, it is a way to stay in the old game, right? It's a way to stay in the old game, to think that the answers exist and that what you gotta do is catch them or find them. You gotta. We're creating our way, right? We are literally imagining our way forward.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
It's much more fun this way.
It is much more fun.
Yeah.
It is much more fun.
And it allows for new, I don't even call them new rules, but just like a different way of being, like, right? Yeah.
Well, I went to Burning Man.
Yes.
And just when you set a different set of rules, you come up with just you give people a space to play with different ways of being with each other. And some amazing things can happen just by changing a couple of rules. Part of what I'm curious about is this attention that you're bringing to partnership, right, and to collaboration, and it sounds like different levels and entry point for that. I wonder, what are you learning about collective intelligence? What are you? Because I know you're a facilitator, right? What are you learning about what it takes to allow the space in between us to speak and to guide? I'm just curious.
One thing that comes to mind, and I'm open to whether or not this hits on your question, right? Is I feel a yearning for the folks partnering with me on the birth center to be in some of the spaces, right, that I've been in that have helped to nurture my growth and my ability to believe in this other way of practicing, this other way of being. And so I think I am both trying to facilitate some of that with the folks who are now my board and my advisors and my friends even, who are helping to hold the container for this project. But it's also like time, right? Like you can't rush this stuff.
Right.
Right? So, yeah, I think about like, I don't know how to do it yet, right? But how to get the board and advisors to do some deep process together, right? Like that there is some retreating that happens and some deepening of that collective. Because otherwise we're going to try to do this liberatory project with all the things we've been talking about, but still operating with like a board of advisors that meets quarterly, that
Right.
weighs in on this way. And so there's still a little bit of something that's inherently incongruous about that, right? That like, you know, I have shifted and there is a community around me that is shifting, and we're still docking into, you know, boards and advisors and funders and institutional partners in some of the old ways. So I don't know.
I think you know. I mean, I'm hearing it. I'm hearing it pretty clearly in what you're saying here. I'm familiar with that tension, and I think you're communicating really well where you are in that arc. Now, I also know, right, that you and I are collaborating on this whole other project, and the other day I got a text message that was actually audio, in which you shared back this collective poem, right? That just was both grounding and expansive. That kind of shared voice, right, where the individual is still fully present, but they're actually made greater by being part of a togetherness. Doesn't kind of just pop up by itself. It takes some attention. Yeah, and so it's to me clearly evident that you've been experimenting with that too, and I'm just curious as to what else you're learning.
Such good questions. I am thinking about, so I think that the poem and the project that you speak of is not directly birth center related. And so I think what I'm expressing is trying to bring some of the practices that I've come to learn both as student and as facilitator in other pieces of my life, kind of figure out how to nurture the birth center, you know, process and people, the web of people supporting the birth center, using some of
Got it.
that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. And what also makes perfect sense is
my furrowed brow, because I don't know how to get out of this hole.
you
don't know the answers.
You don't know the answers.
Yeah.
You don't know the answers. So we gotta go and find them.
Yeah. But meaning like the answers to how that happens with funders, right? And so back to the like experimentation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There's something in what you are. I remember an image that you sent soon after we returned from Evolutionary Leadership, in which you ran your first experiment.
Yes,
right?
I know it clearly.
Right. When I think of that image, and friends, that image, maybe we can find it for the show notes.
Absolutely.
It's just Nashira's home full of women, sitting in circle together, literally imagining this birth center into being. That image captures how much you know about what is possible in this emergence. And I just really I asked because I can feel it from over here, and sometimes a question like that helps make the invisible visible.
Well, that brings something into focus for me, right? So maybe I can ask you a question. Can we flip
Yes,
that?
of course.
So the partners and advisors that are supporting the birth center are a really incredible group of folks, right? Really thoughtful. I wouldn't have them around if they weren't. And when I think about some of the practices that I've experimented with in spaces with you in evolutionary leadership or in retreat space, those would be very new in a space of folks who are some academics, some community organizers, some folks who are coming identifying primarily as parent and having birthed children. So how have you reconciled, so some of those practices would be very new in that space. So I've seen you kind of weave together, practice some, I don't know what we're calling them, but some of these like, practices, emergent practices, in circles. Maybe the individuals might be down with it, but this collective hasn't traveled there yet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm right on the edge of figuring out how to get this circle to drop in a little bit deeper into the collective we, right?
Yeah.
And I keep holding off for like this board retreat that we'll have at some point, and I'm gonna prime some of my facilitator friends to help with that. But so like there's that.
I get it. No, I get it.
Reconciling the two.
I understand, and also knowing, like you said, timing and all of those things earlier. Here's what's coming to me. And I say this all, right, with the acknowledgement that you are doing impossible. Like you had a 1-year-old at home, you're sleep deprived, you have another job, and you're doing this birth center. So
I have a 5-year-old at home too.
A 5-year, yes.
Just to clarify, 2 children.
Yeah. And I love my man Leon, your husband, and I also know as a dude that sometimes it must also feel like a 1-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a husband. So I just want to acknowledge that too, and that's more from my own experience.
Yeah, he's holding up his end, but it is
it's work.
It is
It's
work.
work.
Yeah.
It's work. So I just want to name that, and I name that because I'm convinced that people listening are going to there's people listening right now that are going to want to engage. So in sharing, it's kind of with the tribe of people, as opposed to like, Nashira, I think you should add this to your to-do list.
Absolutely.
But what came to my mind is, just thinking about the last cohort of evolutionary leadership, we had like 4 medicine people in there, right? Women or trans, femme identified, like there's so much wealth of women healer energy here in Boston alone. And part of what I thought is, what if the first step is some kind of energetic cohort, right? 4 or 5 people of this sort that will hold the liberatory aspect of this, right? The reclamation part, the ancestral part. And I don't know what we call them to fit them into the structure, right? But they're doing something very intentional. And then when everybody else comes together, they're shaping the energy by virtue of their presence and their practice and your shared intention. So just some kind of draw on that, because I can imagine. I mean, it plays at every level. It plays at the deepest and most meaningful level. But even these PhDs or MDs that might come into these meetings will be moved and appreciate being in contact with real people doing this in real ways, right? Like people trying to really reclaim our medicine back. So I feel like that there's something there about drawing on that abundance here in Boston that could infiltrate, so that it's not
beautiful.
you
Right.
make, you know what I mean? You're
And
the
it's creating something, not just facilitating
Right.
something, right? It's creating the experience. Yeah. I like that.
That's just the first thing
That's just the first thing that comes to your mind. Brilliant.
Nashira, I am so moved by this conversation. I am so energized by it. There's a lot of aliveness moving through me. Thank you for your labor, and thank you for your generosity, and for following this call. I know it's not always easy, so it's a heroic journey, and I appreciate you being on it, and being on it with others in the way that you are. I have a couple of questions. I mean, first, is anything else you want me or listeners to know? And then I'll ask you I'll ask you two of the questions I'd like to wrap up the podcast with.
Okay. What would I like people to know? I have a vision for engaging with the broader kind of Boston and greater Boston community before the birth centers open, right? So it could be years. I think that's also one of the first questions, when and where, right? We talked a little bit about where earlier. The when, I don't know yet, right? We've got to raise a lot of money and figure out a lot of big questions. But I do have a real desire to engage folks before those doors open. So the things that come to mind are community conversations, right? There's a lot of conversations around healing from, trauma around birth that, could be happening. Conversations around safety around birth centers, just a lot of things that could happen that help to open the conversation, right? Open our hearts up and get the vibration that you're feeling kind of to be shared more widely way before the doors open, right? So that there's a real groundswell, and by the time we cut that ribbon, folks are already knocking down the door. So I just want folks to know that in the next, I'm afraid to put a timeline on it, but I feel like in the next 6 months, spring, right? We're heading into winter. I've got a lot, I'm cooking right now. Spring and summer, I want to emerge with some ways that people can get engaged.
That is super exciting.
Yeah.
I love the way this
events,
sounds.
Activities.
That sounds
movie
amazing.
Screenings. There's just ways to be lifting up the conversation around out of hospital birth and midwifery in a different way.
I love it. I think that's right on point. I think that's really, really compelling.
There's a whole bunch of cool ways. So yeah. So if listeners have ideas,
that's exactly what I'm hoping for.
Yeah,
I mean, I think this is the people listening to this at this stage in our work is our friends, right?
Right. Yeah.
And this is really, really powerful stuff you're talking about here.
And the question, if I can put a question out to folks, is something that we started by me telling you the story of my own ancestors as midwives and my experience growing up with home birth. That is not the experience of a lot of our friends. And so the question I'm always trying to ask is about, to simplify it might be what might get in the way as you think about a birth center as option for you or your family or your grandchildren, or right? And really wanting to hear those stories so that we can be responding to those both in the design of the birth center itself but also in the community conversations, in the next few years in the events, right? What do we need to do to acknowledge how folks might be thinking or feeling or unsure even what a birth center is? What's on your mind, right?
Right.
What comes to mind, and that really informs what we need to. Okay, so this is what folks are wondering. This is what's getting in the way. Is it about safety? Is it about understanding the full scope of services? Is it about, family trauma?
And where would they send that feedback to right now?
Good question. We are about to launch a new website. And so neighborhoodbirthcenter.org is the website. And in the next few weeks, it'll be revamped. And but right now, there's contact information on there and a place to email.
Beautiful, and we'll get that in the show notes too.
Great. Awesome.
Awesome, that's great. I think that you're just approaching this with both strategic smarts and an abundance of heart. This is magic.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I have two questions that they feel like coming completely out of left field. But it's the way I like to wrap up the podcast. And the first one involves a little bit of time travel. We're doing all this speculative sci-fi work and this kind of imagining. So you don't have to answer this part right now, but I'm just going to invite you to see if you can picture yourself 12 years from now. Right? I think that would be the year 2030.
Wow.
2030, just whatever's happening, and what you are hoping to embody, what you're hoping, how you're hoping to be. And so if you can embody that being, the question I want to ask you is, from that perspective, what's the best piece of advice that you could give Nashira sitting here and now?
Trust yourself.
Ashe.
Yeah, you got this.
That's so beautiful. I wish our listeners could see you because your posture right now is so powerful.
I was sitting up like a poised 50-year-old woman, right? With some
Glorious.
12 years.
What a good perspective.
I was like imagining myself like floating, right? I kind of like walk through the world like with an effervescence or something.
Wonderful.
Right?
That is the best perspective. I love it. I just love it. I love it, love it, love it. That's what we need. More you. More and more you.
Yeah,
it's
thank
perfect.
you.
Thank you. The other question, I honestly, to be transparent, I almost hesitate to ask it because the spirit is so elevated. But I think it's an important one, so I have to.
I'm with it.
I just have made a commitment to myself, not to waste any time when I am sitting in front of a powerful woman. And we are living in this very, very challenging time in which, well, it's been always challenging. What is challenging is that the patriarchy's ugly face is kind of being made visible, right? And it's entering the discourse, and it's been so painful to face ourselves in this way, but so important. So as you know, I'm doing work with men through the Better Men Project, and one of the questions I like to ask my guests is, what do you think men should do? What should they know? What should we know? What should we do? How could we best meet this moment?
Wow, that's a great question. I think what I love about the work that you're doing is asking the questions around men acknowledging that there's something to heal from, right? That there's like these ways that patriarchy, among other things, have touched and shaped your existence. That even when you feel the most healthy, enlightened, right, accomplished person, that it's still very much shaped the way you walk through the world, as it's shaped mine, right? One of my dear friends always says that we need men to take on the patriarchy, not because it's jacking up women, but because it's jacking up you. In the same way that we need white folks to take down racism, not because it's jacking up people of color, but because it's jacking up you, jacking up them. So I had to figure out, what liberation feels like, and find some like beautiful relationships, tender relationships with other men, right?
Yes. Because
that's what's going to allow them to have that transformative experience at their child's birth that you had when Darshan was born. Being able to touch that part of yourself, right? You have to be awakening some of that in relationships around you in order to be able to touch that in that moment. So what a miss, right?
Wow.
When we're not allowing, when we as a society are not allowing our brothers, and our brothers are not allowing themselves to touch into that moment,
Yeah.
that divine feminine, and what happens to you in the moment that your child is born.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
it remains the single most important moment in my life.
Yeah.
It really does.
But what had to happen in order to be able to connect in that way,
Yeah.
and how it's that hasn't happened for a lot of folks.
That's right. Wow. What a
That's how they get free too. And the birth center is not just about folks who identify as women or folks who are birthing getting free, but it's about our partners and the men in our lives also getting free.
Ashe. Preach.
Ashe.
Thank you so much. How generous.
you.
That really, really struck me. It moved me deeply, and it brings me back to this conviction that this thing that you're doing is as smart and powerful an intervention as we could be making right now. It really, I mean, I try to be careful with kind of this blanket statements, but there's something about it that is so at the core, so primal, so centering the feminine, right? So reclaiming what's the wisdom that our bodies already hold, right? It feels like the golden key to where we're going, and I'm so grateful. Yes, I'm very, very, very grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your journey.
I hope that families at the birth center get to have that experience that you've had for many years to come.
Ashe.
Yeah.
Ashe.
you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Gracias.